What do Cuba, Panama, and the Bahamas have in common? Crystal clear waters and some of the darkest secrets in Mafia history. December 1946, Havana, Cuba. Frank Sinatra steps off a plane carrying a suitcase with $2 million in cash. He's flanked by the Fischetti brothers, Al Capone's cousins, and nobody at the airport asks any questions. They're heading to the Hotel Nacional, where the most powerful crime bosses in America are waiting. Lucky Luciano, Santo Traficante, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, all the heavyweights are in the room. They're about to slice up a birthday cake decorated with a map of Cuba and hand out pieces to each crime family like they're dividing up territory. Except the territory they're carving up isn't neighborhoods or cities. It's the entire global financial system. This was the Mafia's money game of turning island nations into invisible banks, and billionaires never stopped using them. The guy behind it all was the soft-spoken accountant from the Lower East Side named Meyer Lansky. While other mobsters were muscle and intimidation, Lansky was the brain, the guy who could make numbers dance and money disappear, the mob's accountant. And he just convinced every major crime family in America to invest in his vision of a criminal empire that operated completely beyond the reach of any government. But let's rewind to 1933 for a bit. Meyer Lansky, the numbers guy, walks into a meeting with a Cuban military sergeant named Fulgencio Batista. Lansky opens several suitcases filled with cash. We're talking millions of dollars. You might think it was a bribe, but these people like to call it an investment. An investment in creating the world's first offshore criminal empire. Lansky had a vision that was way ahead of its time. While other mobsters were content running illegal casinos in back alleys, Lansky saw the bigger picture. He understood that the real money wasn't in breaking the law. It was in operating somewhere the law couldn't touch you. So, the deal was simple. Batista would guarantee Lansky a monopoly on casino gambling in Cuba. In exchange, Batista would receive between $3 to $5 million a year, plus a cut of all profits. And everything would be completely legal under Cuban law. For over a decade, this arrangement sat on the back burner while Batista played politics. But in 1952, when Batista seized power in a military coup, Lansky's investment finally paid off. Cuba was about to become the Caribbean's Las Vegas, except with no oversight, no gaming commission, and no questions asked about where the money came from. But Lansky had already set things in motion years earlier. In December 1946, he hosted the infamous Hotel Nacional meeting in Havana, a private summit of America's most powerful mob bosses. It was the first time Lansky brought them all together to talk seriously about Cuba. The casinos were just the beginning. The real goal was controlling the economy of an entire country. Of course, those people weren't just interested in building more casinos so citizens could gamble more. They were after the sweet magic of making dirty money disappear. And the key to the whole operation was something that wouldn't become common until decades later: offshore banking. See, the real innovation was what happened to the money after it hit the tables of the casinos. Traditional money laundering in the 1940s was primitive. You'd run cash through legitimate businesses, maybe a restaurant or a construction company, to make it look clean. But Lansky had figured out something revolutionary. If you could move money across international borders, you could make it essentially untraceable. How? Let me explain. Let's say a mob family in New York made $1 million from trafficking some not-so-legal substances. Instead of trying to launder that money through American businesses, they'd wire it to a casino account in Havana. The money would show up on Cuban bank records as gaming revenue, a thing that was completely legitimate under Cuban law. But why stop there? That gaming revenue would be invested in Cuban real estate, or used to buy shares in other businesses, or transferred to Swiss bank accounts. By the time investigators tried to trace the money, it had passed through so many jurisdictions and legitimate-looking transactions that finding the original crime was nearly impossible. In fact, Batista's government passed laws in 1955 that basically rolled out the red carpet for dirty money. Anyone who invested $1 million in a Cuban hotel or $200,000 in a nightclub didn't have to reveal where the money came from. No background checks, no questions asked. More importantly, they established what we'd now call secrecy laws. Cuban banks were prohibited from sharing account information with foreign governments. If the FBI wanted to know about American money in Cuban banks, too bad. Cuban law said that information was confidential. And you won't believe this, but this is the exact same system that modern offshore havens use today. By the late 1950s, money was flowing through Cuba like water. Conservative estimates put Lansky's operation at handling over $500 million, and that's in 1950s money. In today's terms, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars moving through this one tiny island. Now, if Lansky had already proven that his system worked, why stop in Cuba? He wanted something much more ambitious, a global network of financial safe havens that could handle dirty money from anywhere in the world. While Batista provided the political protection, Lansky was busy setting up the technical infrastructure. He bought a bank in Switzerland, yeah, an entire bank, which he used as the central hub for moving money around the world. Swiss banking secrecy laws meant that even if someone suspected what was happening, they couldn't prove it. He established connections with banks in the Bahamas, just 90 miles from Florida. If heat came down on the Cuban operation, money could be moved to Nassau within hours. He set up shell companies, fake corporations that existed only on paper, that could own assets without revealing their true owners. Meyer Lansky had essentially invented what we now call the offshore financial system, except he did it decades before it became legal for everyone else. The operation was so sophisticated that it caught the attention of the CIA. During World War II, when the US government needed help protecting American shipping from Nazi saboteurs, they actually recruited Lansky and his organization. The mob's intelligence network was better than anything the government had, but the CIA relationship went deeper than that. When they needed to fund covert operations, the kind of activities that couldn't appear in any government budget, they used Lansky's financial network. A bank in the Bahamas called Castle Bank and Trust, founded by former CIA officer Paul Helliwell, became a key hub for both mob money and intelligence funding. It turns out the same techniques that were perfect for laundering drug money were also perfect for funding secret wars. But maybe that's a story for another time. Back to Lansky. The party was coming to an end. On January 1st, 1959, Fidel Castro's revolutionaries marched into Havana, and Lansky's empire came crashing down overnight. Batista had fled the country, and the protection was gone. The money, too. Well, not all of it. They managed to save some, but millions were left behind when the casinos were shut down and nationalized. Batista himself escaped with an estimated $300 million in cash and art that he'd accumulated through his partnership with the mob. But losing Cuba didn't destroy Lansky's system. If anything, it forced it to evolve. With Cuba out of the picture, the Bahamas became the new center of operations. The same banks, the same shell companies, the same secrecy laws. They all just moved 90 miles north. And because the Bahamas were a British colony, they had access to the entire British banking system too. Panama also stepped up as a major player. The same lawyers who had been setting up Cuban corporations started offering Panamanian companies instead. Panama had even better secrecy laws than Cuba. Companies could be owned by anonymous bearer shares, meaning whoever physically held the stock certificates owned the company. No names, no records, complete anonymity. By the 1960s, what had started as a Cuban casino operation had become a global offshore industry. Banks in Switzerland, shell companies in Panama, real estate investments in London, art purchases in New York. Dirty money could travel the world and come out looking completely clean. And naturally, other criminal organizations started copying Lansky's methods. The Italian-American Mafia, Colombian drug cartels, Russian oligarchs. They all learned from the master. The techniques that Lansky pioneered for moving mob money became the foundation for every major money laundering operation that followed. Fast forward to the 1970s and 80s, and something interesting happened. What had been exclusively a criminal enterprise started going mainstream. Wealthy individuals who weren't criminals began using the same offshore techniques to avoid taxes. Multinational corporations started setting up subsidiaries in the same tax havens that the mob had been using. Governments began turning a blind eye because these offshore centers were bringing in enormous amounts of legitimate investment. The system that Lansky built to launder crime proceeds had become the global financial system. Swiss banks started marketing their secrecy services to anyone with enough money. Panama began actively promoting itself as a business-friendly jurisdiction with strong privacy protections. The Bahamas developed an entire financial services industry based on helping foreign clients avoid taxes and regulations. By the 1990s, offshore banking had become so normalized that major newspapers were running advertisements for Swiss bank accounts and Cayman Islands corporations. What had once been the exclusive domain of organized crime was now available to anyone with a few $1,000s and a good lawyer. Which brings us to the modern era. The only difference was scale. Instead of hundreds of millions of dollars in mob money, we are now talking about trillions of dollars flowing through offshore havens every year. And just like that, what started with a suitcase of mob cash in Havana became the foundation of a global shadow economy. Meyer Lansky didn't just invent a new way to hide dirty money. He built a system so effective, so adaptable that the world's wealthiest people still use it today. Corporations, politicians, dictators, celebrities, they're all playing the same game the Mafia pioneered nearly a century ago. Only now, it's legal. And the crazy part? We still call it offshore finance, like it's some harmless business tool. But behind that phrase lies a system designed for secrecy, built on corruption, and rooted in organized crime. A system born in Cuba, perfected in Panama, and thriving in places like the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Delaware. The offshore game didn't end with Lansky, it scaled up. And if you follow the money far enough, you'll find that today's players wear suits, not fedoras. Money never sleeps on Wall Street, and neither does on our channel. Watch all the mind-blowing Wall Street stories and explore intriguing money movies, all here in one place. Like this video and subscribe to The Money Game to level up your financial game today.